We live in an era in which human beings are no longer seen as living beings, but are reduced to disposable parts of an invisible machine, a machine that not only produces goods and services, but also consumes identities, dreams, and senses. Time, which should be the most intimate measure of existence, has been hijacked by agendas, goals, and schedules, turning each day into a battlefield against deadlines and pressures that never cease. Life is no longer something to be experienced to the fullest, but rather something to be accounted for in hours worked, goals achieved, and productivity delivered. This perverse logic is not the result of chance, but of a culture that has learned to idolize work as if it were an end in itself, forgetting that it should only be a means to live. Today, we no longer work to live, we live to work. This deviation is disguised as a virtue. The exhausted individual is celebrated as a hero. Those who give up rest are exalted as examples of dedication. Those who sacrifice family, health, and peace in the name of their career are seen as worthy of respect. Meanwhile, those who dare to stray from this altar of productivity are marginalized, ridiculed, and accused of laziness. Resting, contemplating, slowing down, acts natural to our human condition, have been relegated to the category of vices, as if leisure time were a threat to the social order. The system not only exploits labor, it even hijacks the possibility of silence and pause, because it knows that a man who rests is also a man who thinks, and a man who thinks is a risk to any machinery of oppression. Thoreau, in his timeless lucidity, already realized that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And today, that phrase echoes like a collective epitaph. Despair is not only silent, it is disguised by forced smiles, by posts about professional achievements on social media, by awards that mask slavery. The feeling of emptiness is numbed by consumption, and the lack of meaning is camouflaged by the incessant pace. It is no longer about living, but about fulfilling. It is no longer about being, but about appearing. That is why overwork has become the secret religion of our time, because everyone participates in it, even without realizing it, offering their hours, their energy, their health, and ultimately their soul as a daily sacrifice. The question that remains is, how long will we accept this altar? How long will we confuse survival with life? How long will we let the machine dictate not only what we do, but also who we are? To live like a cog is to die alive, and perhaps the greatest rebellion of our time is to reclaim the right to rest, silence, and the simple act of existing without apologizing for not being productive. For slowing down today is more than a choice. It is an act of resistance. Work, which should be merely a means of securing a livelihood and offering dignity to life, has become the yardstick that measures human worth itself. We no longer ask, "Who are you?" but rather, "What do you do?" As if essence could be reduced to the function performed in an increasingly ruthless social machine. Modern man has ceased to be a being and has become a doing, and his name is no longer what defines him, but rather the badge he wears, the position he occupies, the resume he displays. It's as if the soul has been replaced by an identification number, and the uniqueness of each individual dissolved into productivity statistics. We are reduced to profiles on professional networks, to positions that can be filled by anyone else, to replaceable cogs in a machine that cares nothing for the human, only for the continuous and blind functioning of the system. And the most disturbing thing is that it's not enough to be exploited. We've learned to applaud the exploitation itself. We beat our chest to say we work 12, 14, 16 hours a day, as if exhaustion were a badge of honor and not a sign of illness. We transform lack of sleep into a trophy, endless coffee into war fuel, sacrificed weekends into proof of loyalty to the game. We post on social media not only our achievements, but our very fatigue, hoping for recognition for letting ourselves be crushed without complaint. We fail to realize that this celebration of servitude is nothing more than a collective delusion, a self-deception disguised as virtue. Rest, which should be a non-negotiable right and a sacred space for mind and body, has been hijacked by productivist logic and transformed into a sin. Sleeping is seen as weakness, stopping is wasting opportunities, disconnecting is almost a betrayal of the fighting spirit the world demands. And to ensure that even pause remains under the control of the machinery, we have created a capitalized version of idleness. Leisure that needs to be useful, vacations that need to be Instagrammable, hobbies that need to generate extra income or at least social engagement. Even rest has been transformed into a commodity, wrapped in smiles and advertising slogans, but still chained to the obligation to serve. This cruel inversion tears us away from life's most elementary experience, being without needing to prove it. Thoreau already denounced in his time that the mass of men lived in silent despair, and today this despair is no longer silent. It is published, shared, liked, and monetized. We live in a time when being human is insufficient. We must be machines, and if we are not, we will be discarded. And yet, it is precisely in this insane movement that the urgency of resistance is revealed. Refusing to measure life by the clock, by the badge, or by productivity, and reclaiming the right to simply exist. And in this collective delirium, we don't realize what we've lost. We've lost the ability to be, we've lost the ability to contemplate, we've lost the right to simply exist without justification. Nature, which always offered an antidote to the insanity of haste, is now seen only as a backdrop for quick photos that are soon forgotten. Aimlessly walking has become a luxury, slow cooking has become a delay, conversation without looking at the clock has become eccentricity. Silence, which could be healing, is frightening. We prefer constant noise because deep down we fear facing the emptiness that hides when machines fall silent. The price of this life is devastating. Bodies collapsing into silent illness, minds fragmented by anxiety and depression, relationships reduced to hurried messages. What we call progress is nothing more than an increasingly efficient machine for crushing souls, reducing human beings to a disposable resource. Thoreau, who retreated to his cabin in Walden, sought isolation not out of whim, but resistance out of necessity. He understood that living in the machine is to lose oneself, that every minute sold in excess is an irretrievable life. The price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it, he said, and never has this phrase been more urgent than now. Today, we trade years of our lives for cars we don't drive, clothes we don't wear, status that doesn't fulfill us. We are exiled from ourselves, begging for crumbs of recognition in exchange for the essence that should belong to us. We live to work and work to consume, but consuming doesn't fulfill. It only creates the need for more consumption, perpetuating the cycle that feeds the machine. And in this cycle, what should be human is shredded. Time with family, unfulfilled dreams, abandoned passions, mornings that will never return. Overwork is a new form of slavery, disguised as freedom, sold as success, but paid for with our own souls. The frightening thing is that, amid so much haste and excessive tasks, we no longer know how to simply stop. We've been conditioned from an early age to rush, to accelerate, to measure our worth by the speed with which we complete tasks and achieve goals. When we rarely get a moment of pause, it scares us. We feel uncomfortable in the silence, inactivity, the simple act of existing without producing. Rest, which should be a natural and restorative right, has become a threat. The restless mind interprets calm as waste. The body accustomed to pressure feels guilty, and free time becomes something almost criminal. Many only find meaning in their lives when they are overwhelmed, because society has trained them to confuse burden with purpose, urgency with relevance, exhaustion with fulfillment. This logic silently imprisons us, makes us defenders of our own slavery. We perpetuate the machine that devours us, not because we are forced to, but because we have learned to believe there is no alternative. We work to exhaustion, and when we reach a moment of pause, we feel disconnected from ourselves and fearful of not using our time as we should. The modern world has transformed human beings into automatons, but in such a sophisticated way that the automaton believes it is exercising choice, freedom, and control. We remain obedient not to a visible force, but to invisible mechanisms, social pressure, constant comparison, the need for validation, the anxiety of not appearing sufficient. These invisible chains weigh more heavily than any physical shackles. There are no whips, but there are expectations. There are no cells, but there are deadlines. There are no guards, but there are looks of approval and disapproval. Today's slavery is voluntary, silent and sneaky, and perhaps that's why it's even harder to break. It's a trap built on the fear of being judged, of falling behind, of missing opportunities, of not living up to the ideal created by the system. We are simultaneously victims and accomplices, and this awareness makes escape even more complex. However, awareness of this state is the first step toward liberation. Recognizing that we are trapped not only by external circumstances, but by internal patterns of thought and behavior, allows us to glimpse alternatives. Resting, slowing down, reflecting, and disconnecting from the compulsion to produce is not a luxury, but a vital necessity. Learning to say no, to refuse excess, to prioritize life over work, and the appearance of productivity is, in itself, a form of resistance. If we continue to ignore this voluntary imprisonment, each generation will be increasingly conditioned to confuse rushing with relevance, overload with meaning, and the lack of pause with failure. But by reclaiming the right to simply be, to breathe, to look at the world without urgency, we open a breach, however small, to freedom. It is in this space that real life begins, far from the machinery that tries to crush our souls. We need to regain the courage to say enough. We need to reclaim the right to rest without guilt, to occupy our leisure time without justification, to simply live without productive goals that imprison us. It is urgent to remember that we are human beings, made to experience life to its fullest, and not mere cogs in a machine that profits from our exhaustion. Incessant work, constant haste, and the social pressure to be productive have transformed our existence into a cycle of continuous wear and tear, and the paradox is cruel. The more we surrender to the machinery, the further we move away from what truly matters, from what defines us as human, from what allows us to breathe, reflect, and feel. Thoreau taught us that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we are able to let go of, in what we can leave behind without fear or regret. Perhaps the greatest revolution of our time is not technological, but existential. It is the courage to stop when everyone else is rushing, to rest when everyone else is working, to live when everyone else is merely surviving. But this rebellion requires awareness and discipline. It won't be easy, because the machinery molds us from birth. We learn to obey the imposed rhythm, to measure value by productivity, to confuse busyness with importance. Every act of slowing down is a gesture against the current, a challenge to a culture that idolizes excess and ignores being. Every moment of refusal to perform unnecessary tasks, every instant of true presence, every minute dedicated to silence or contemplation is a blow against the machine that tries to crush us. It is in these intervals that we reconnect, that we rediscover our humanity, that we understand that life is not limited to goals, deadlines, or fingerprints on spreadsheets. The modern world tries to convince us that resting is wrong, that pausing is failure, that slowing down is laziness. But the truth is that life is impossible without rest, without reflection, without moments when we can simply exist. If we continue to ignore this need, the machinery will continue to grind not only our bodies, but also our souls, crumbling dreams, emotions, relationships, and meanings, until nothing remains but the dust of a humanity that has forgotten how to live. Reclaiming the right to rest is, therefore, an act of survival and resistance. Every time we turn off our cell phones, refuse useless commitments, slow down, or take a deep breath without rushing, we are asserting our freedom. We are saying that life is not measured by what we do, but by what we are able to feel, perceive, and experience. We are remembering, as Thoreau did, that true existence lies not in accumulating, producing, or impressing, but in living consciously, in choosing what deserves our time and energy, and in rejecting everything that turns us into cogs in a machine that devours us. Awakening to this reality is slow and requires courage, but each step is a victory against the tyranny of excess. Reclaiming life requires learning to stop, to observe, to rest, and above all to recognize ourselves as human, not as a cog.